It's Lucy Litch, and this is Tiny House Conversations. It's the Australian-based podcast where I interview experienced tiny houses, tiny builders, and adventurers in the tiny world so you can discover how to create, build, and transition into tiny life. Hey, it's Lucy here, bringing you another episode of Tiny House Conversations. So what's the deal with tiny house insurance? This is one of the most frequently asked about topics, especially for new and curious tiny houses. And today on the show, I'm speaking with Paul Bentvelzen, who is an insurance broker from Sydney and also has his own tiny house. And I've asked Paul to join me on the show today as there's some uncertainty when it comes to tiny insurance. And there are also some challenges and limitations in this space that you'll want to know more about, especially if you're thinking of building or buying a tiny home. And since Paul works in insurance and has his own tiny home, he's in a unique position and has some great insights to share with you. In this conversation, we talk about different options for insuring a tiny house on wheels as a caravan and considerations for tiny houses on foundations, why there are limited options in the market for insuring tiny houses, insurance options for tiny house short-term rentals, the limitations and issues with tiny house insurance for running it as a business in a business name, as well as running it through Airbnb, the limitations and issues around offering and advertising other activities such as water sports like canoeing, kayaking, and even other rural type activities with your tiny house experiences, and so much more. Now, before we get into the show today, I want to offer a disclaimer. The information discussed in this conversation is not intended to offer financial or insurance advice. It's for educational purposes only, and please seek the professional advice of your own insurance broker or directly through your insurance company before making any decisions about your insurance or your finances. Now, with that being said, on to the show with Paul. Hey, Paul, welcome to Tiny House Conversations, and thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, great to be with you guys, really.
So, Paul, you're a Sydney-based insurance broker and at Ian Hewitt and Associates, and you've also got your own tiny house located in Lithgow in New South Wales. And what I'd love to do today is, firstly, hear about your own tiny house experience, and then we can dive into all about tiny house insurance. Does that sound okay for you?
Yeah, sounds great. My tiny house, it's been my project for the last 2 years. It's a passion and it's a love for sure. At one stage, my daughter was into horse riding, and we had a property here in Glenbrook, which we really love the area as well. But we were thinking, maybe we should look at acreage out at Caravan or Windsor or Richmond, so that she could pursue her horse riding. I always wanted to have acreage as well. I always dreamed of having, a property that I could be on, and but the logistics was just the price was out of our reach. The travel to the kids' school was out of our reach, and thank God she stopped doing horse riding and that interest was gone. But around that same time, my wife looked at some properties out at Gangmanang, like Kandibula, which is kind of on the Cox's River on your way to Lithgow. And it's funny how the world works. Basically, we drove up there to look at a property. As we drove up, we went past a big sign. That sign was one of our clients, actually, who was advertising their services. And I didn't really even realise that they lived there. I just recognised the sign. When I came back and I saw him as a mechanic, I said, the property was too far out, but I'm so keen on anything out there. It's a beautiful space of the world. And he said, basically there's nothing going around. You've really got to go to the pub and talk to the locals to see what's going. And then about 3-4 months later, he called me and said, "Yep, I've got a block for you. My next door neighbour's property has fallen through. Give him a call." So we ran up there on I think he called me on a Wednesday. We got up there on a Saturday, and I signed his hand and said, "Yeah, we'll definitely take this block." So we put a 4-bedroom DA in for the block, but as always, I didn't realise that you have to put power on, you have to put water tanks on, you have to fix up the driveway, all these additional costs associated with it. And at the same time, my accountant sent me a request to insure a tiny home. And it just came across my desk, and I was unsure about it. So I did a little bit of research on how we can insure it and where we can insure it through, and then sent that to my wife, and she just said, "Look, let's not go through with the house. Let's just put a tiny home on our property." My daughter had lost interest in horse riding. It'll be a weekender for us, and then the research started. And he basically said to me, "Don't go with my builder. Go with Eco Designer Tiny Homes down at Ulladulla." And we made contact with Grant and their crew down there as well, and they were fantastic. And they're a Dutch family like our family as well, so we had a lot in common. And we went down to the open day. We looked at their models. We had a chat, and straight away we put an order in for their tiny homes. And in April 20, it was delivered to our site, which was exciting. And since that time, I've been building a annex around there and a deck. I also had a shed put on. Initially, we put a shed on there because we're going to put a shed on and then build the house from the shed. So the shed was already there with water tanks and little cubby house around one of the trees as well. And it's a great little space. We love it so much.
It's we were just talking offline before about how you were saying that, you know, you're building your annex and other things around the home. And I think that's really beautiful. And I kind of plan to do the same with mine. So, you know, I think there's something really lovely about having a hand in, you know, building something that you're going to, that's going to be yours for a really long time. And that's, you know, I guess a part of you in some way. And Designer Eco Tiny Homes has really beautiful models for sure. And I think it's really cool too how you had a client that came to you and then it kind of opened you up to this path in a way that sort of aligned with what you do for your professional work as well.
The timing of it was just absolutely perfect. And there's a lot of things that were evolving at that time. Like my daughter was going into being plant-based diet, and then I tried to encourage her to do it. So I became plant-based as well. And we traveled over to America, which was very difficult at that stage. But so the plant-based environment, as I said before, my wife is a yoga teacher and she does conscious coaching and into mindfulness as well. And the tiny home just fits well within our philosophy of sustainability and the smallest environmental footprint that you can have. And yeah, something we really enjoyed. And the annex was built with basically offcuts and materials that we had from the mezzanine, so the steel mezzanine level that we put into the shed. We had a lot of offcuts of beams and so on, and then the whole outside of the shed is basically offcuts of the corrugated steel that was part of the shed that was left over as well. So very cost conscious in regards to putting the annex together, and that's the same footprint as the caravan, which is again under the same legislations for the caravan. Is that the footprint for the annex needs to be the same internal dimensions as what the caravan is, so that everything just fit really well in that area.
Yeah, and I guess also combining that with repurposing materials, which is obviously another good aspect of, you know, not having to introduce new things and recycling and all of that. So that's really great. And what size is your tiny home?
It's 7.2 meters long by 2.4, or just over 2.4. They've got a bigger model now, but it was their biggest model back then, 2020.
Yeah, and at the moment, so you're planning on that being like an Airbnb of some sort, like a short-term rental a weekend for your family as well?
Yes and no. Like obviously it's a weekender, and I do, because it's only an hour and a half from where I work and where I live, I do travel up there midweek as well to check on the property as well. So it's funny, like you said, like you build it and it's yours and you're so proud of it, and there's a big satisfaction that comes into it than just seeing it and going, oh, this is pretty cool. So then when you start thinking, oh, I'm going to rent it out and other people can share in that experience, which I'm really excited about. You're also like, oh, I don't want it to be damaged. I don't want it to be wrecked. I don't want it to be mistreated, you know. So, but yes, essentially, within probably the next couple of months, we'll be trying to look at Airbnb-ing it out, or I know Into the Wild want to come and have a look at it as well, to see if it fits within their portfolio. And so we're going to, yes, definitely, we're definitely going to go down that track at some stage, but it's difficult letting go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something that you work so hard.
Is it an off the grid home? Like, have you got all the off grid facilities?
It's not. It's not. It's because we set up for the DA, and when I did the research in regards to solar versus power, like we had power to the boundary fence, so power ended up costing us 50 grand, and I think the solar at that stage was going to be around the same price, but you've got ongoing cost with solar, but then you've also got ongoing costs with electricity as well, though our electricity bill is very, very small. But look, given my chance again, I would have 100% went fully off the grid. And I think that is a big thing when you're also trying to attract a certain clientele via Airbnb or via any of the platforms that you're going to promote your tiny house, is that sustainability is definitely within that movement. And no, so I've got power on the block, unfortunately, and I do have solar for the lights, which Grant and the crew always put a solar panel on the top of the tiny to power the lights. So that is there. But yeah, no, it's not fully off the grid.
Thank you for sharing all about your tiny home and what you're creating there. It sounds exciting. And, I'd love to switch gears and dive more into tiny house insurance, because I know that's something that you deal with your own clients. And, in New South Wales and some other states around Australia, I know that tiny homes on wheels, they're classed as caravans. And would love to know, what are some of the different options for insuring caravans and therefore, I suppose, tiny houses on wheels?
So, yeah, exactly what you said. Like I stumbled across it because obviously I'm an insurance broker and I've got a tiny home, and our relationship with Eco Designer, we said we're happy to help their clients. They said, look, we're struggling a little bit in regards to what options their clients can have with insurance. It's not 100% clear, and it seems a little bit disjointed in regards to what they can normally get in terms of a home and contents policy or a landlord policy as well. So
before we move on, I just wanted to jump in here and let you know that in the next section, Paul mentions a couple of abbreviations that you may or may not be familiar with. And because of the flow of the conversation and Paul sharing so much great information, I missed asking him to clarify what those terms stood for, just in case you weren't familiar with it. So those terms were DA, so Development Approval or Development Application, and ADR, so the Australian Design Rules. And Paul does share some context around those in regards to insurance options for caravans. And if you want more information on those, I've put links in the show notes for this episode, so you can check them out later. But for now, back to the show with Paul.
You've got to kind of keep in mind that you're crossing across two different legislations. So you've got your DAs, which your approved buildings, which can slot easily under landlord, home and contents policies, farm packs and so on, and can be also registered under business or a superannuation fund that owns a policy and is still renting it out, whether it be short-term or long-term. Then you have your ADR rules, which is basically the legislation relating to motor and caravans. And this is where the caravan tiny homes come under. And it's difficult because if you ring up an insurer and say, I want to get insurance for a tiny home, they're not thinking it's a caravan. They're thinking it's a tiny home, like a home that's tiny. So, which is very different to a caravan. So you have to be very careful in regards to when you're actually navigating through insurers direct in regards to getting quotes, what you actually physically say to them it is. So like essentially say for some insurers will say, come through, say, Eco Designer tiny homes. So we know, because I'm quite clear on what I've done, so we know what type of caravan it is and what their goals and objectives might be. There's three main options really. There's the caravan insurer policy, and then obviously you've got that is always private, so you can't put it in a business name. Although we have had in the past it be insured under a business name under sometimes the underwriter just gets it wrong. So it's very important that the listeners know that, depending on if the insurer agrees, then the insurer agrees, and sometimes that isn't the policy wording. But that's private use, and you can put the higher option on that policy, and that allows you to cover particularly public liability if the hirer gets injured. And then again, some caravan insurance policies will exclude personal injury relating to the person that's hiring it or the person you give consent to have. So that's very important, because if you have a hirer that's hiring your caravan and you've got the hire option on the policy, so everything's okay, but then they slip down your very high stairs because the stairs are ADR approved. They're not building, they're not DA approved with a balustrade and certain heights and so on. Then you could be sued personally for causing injury to the hirer based on hiring that caravan. So at all times, in the caravan insurance policy, you need to make sure that what you say to the insurer is exactly what you're doing, and then obviously you need to get professional advice from your broker to make sure that what you're worried about is actually getting picked up. The second point, like my policy right now is on a farm pack, so I insure it on a farm pack. I insure it under farm property, and I also pick up my contents, my shed, my water tank, my pumps, my fencing, and my liability relating to farm, because I might have just a couple of the next door neighbour has cattle, and I might help adjust those on my land as well. And if they get out and they cause damage, I want to be covered there as well. So I currently have mine under a farm pack, but it excludes hiring it out to people. So if I'm going to hire it out, if I start moving down that track of hiring it out, then I've got to start thinking about, am I going to hire it out on a platform like Airbnb and just worry about the cover they provide while I'm hiring it out, and keep it on my farm pack to cover all other, like in between the hires, so the storm damage, the fire damage, and my personal public liability as well. The third step, which is really difficult, and we have a number of clients like this where they run it as a business. The caravan's registered in a business name. The money gets collected in the business, and it's purely based as a business use. And this is a difficulty because you can't really form it under a caravan insurance policy, and you can't really get it under a farm pack. If it's just a tiny home, that is, that they're doing, not a big farm pack in regards to a lot of different activities that are on there that you might be able to link it to. And in this situation, what we are able to do is get public liability for the hirer, like the person that's hiring that property, and then trying to get material damage on the caravan, like any damage relating to the caravan by the hirer, or if it burns down, or if there's storm damage. That's difficult because when you go back to the insurers, and that will then relate to whether they get flood cover or whether they get fire cover because of bushfires, and a lot of these properties are in bushfire zoned areas as well. So there is some difficulties in putting it completely in a business name and running it as a business. They're your three main options that we use anyway.
Yeah, it sounds like it's so dependent on what people's situations are, and there's lots of limitations here and there as well. And what I was thinking of as you were talking is, what about if someone has a tiny house on wheels, and then some people I know will, once they've maybe got a permanent parking space or they're parking on their land or wherever it might be, take the wheels off so that it's not actually fixed. Does that change anything when it comes to insurance? Because it's not a caravan anymore, is it? If they, well, I don't know. I'm not sure if that's something that you're aware of or not.
Yeah, I have heard this, and again, if you ring up some of the caravan insurers, which we do, like we'll ring them up. Well, we don't deal with the direct insurers, although we are familiar with some of their policy wordings and so on. But there are questions that the insurers will say, like, are the wheels on or off it? And in my opinion, it's irrelevant. Like the ADR rules for a caravan says that it needs to be able to be registered. It doesn't have to be registered. It needs to be able to be registered. And I don't think that's dependent on whether the wheels are on or not. The other thing as well is that the legislation relating to caravans is it needs to be in a safe working order. So basically, you need to have footings on it, and those footings need to be able to withstand any of the wind loads relating to that area. So I think my area is 42 meters per second. So basically, it's quite windy there, and I need to make sure that I've got footings on that caravan. So my wheels are still on it. I've just left them on it because it was just more convenient to do so. But I am starting to play with the ideas of, putting some footings down, just not concreting them in, but putting some footings on the axles and taking the wheels off just to save the wheels. But I'm not sure whether that has an impact on the insurance, but where if it's a caravan, it's under a caravan insurance policy. If it's a caravan that's taken the wheels off and it's put on the foundations, and therefore you want to go through with a DA, because I have heard of people in bushfire zoned areas where the legislation was changed after the bushfires to say that you can have a caravan that can be occupied 100% of the time if there's no other DA approved property on there, for the purposes of reinstating a house after fire. There are clients that have had a caravan and tried to get a DA, so try to get it approved as a building. And once it's approved as a building, then you can slide straight onto a landlord policy or a home and contents policy, or a farm pack, basically, as a building. So I'm not familiar whether taking the wheels on or off would exclude cover. Not from any of the insurers that we place it with.
Okay. No, that's good to know, because I think that the purpose of some people taking the wheels off is because of the grey area with the regulations of like how long can you actually stay in the home, using it as a permanent versus a temporary, short-term rental, or staying in it a couple of days a week, or something like 60 days a year, or 100 and something days a year, something like that. So I think I've heard, I'm not 100% sure, but I've heard, and it might have even been in a podcast with Grant, about can someone get around those types of things. And I think that was just a point that came up, but I don't know if there's a conclusive answer to it. But as you say, like it's not clear in the insurance and how that affects it as well.
And even with the legislation relating to the caravans, like it's there's the big issue about whether you can rent it out. Like it's the legislation, the building legislation, it depends on separate councils and so on, but the state regulations relates to, and I'm not a lawyer in any way, shape or form, this is just my personal, looking into it while I was a tiny home owner, not necessarily an insurance broker. And you got the 60 days, I think it's 60 days, no more than 2 days in a row. And I don't think that makes reference that you're allowed to hire it out. You're allowed to use it for personal use. But if you've got a DA approved building, you can have a family member live in the caravan 100% of the time. But a lot of the tiny home owners don't have a DA approved building on their property. They're either putting their tiny home on a property that is a friend's, or they're renting that space, and there's no other approved building on there. So yeah, and that again comes back to the question in regards to the insurance side of things as well. So I would always, if a client was renting their caravan out, I would always try to keep it onto a caravan type insurance policy with a higher option on it. Because if you start going down the landlord type policy, you take the wheels off and then you try to list it as a landlord policy or a home and contents policy, there could be exclusions relating to it if it's not approved, not an approved building or a DA approved. So there is some sticky points there, I guess.
Yeah, it's a bit of a grey area, isn't it? And so we were talking before about like if you've got the tiny house and then you take the wheels off potentially, and then it's more of a tiny house on a foundation, or maybe someone's actually just from the start built a tiny house on a foundation. So that obviously changes it to not being classed as a caravan anymore, but a fixed dwelling. So you're talking a little bit before, so someone would have to maybe go down the route of looking into a DA and getting council approval and things like that. Yes. But what about as it relates to insurance? Can you go a little bit more into that?
Firstly, like whatever insurance policy you go into it, as long as the insurer knows exactly what you're doing, that is the safest bet. So, even we've got experiences where we've quoted public liability for clients and relating to their tiny home, and the insurers, because we obviously use a lot of online portals, and so online portals can sometimes be a little bit deceiving in regards to what you're telling the insurer. So we could pick up an occupation code called caravan hiring. So that sounds exactly what one of our clients might do. They've got a caravan, they hire the caravan out, and they need some public liability, and they're not really interested in covering the caravan for damage. They just want public liability as well. We can get insurers to quote some of that, but once and they'll accept that as a caravan hirer. But when you then go back and say, I just want to clarify to the insurance company, I just want to clarify that our client has a tiny home, it's a caravan, it's under ADR rules, it's static, it's on a property, and they rent it out to short-term stays by Airbnb. So pretty specific in exactly what they do. They will come back and say no in our experience. So where you could probably slide it through without any questions because it looks quite clear, as soon as you start to explain it to the insurer, they say, well, hang on, that's a different idea of what we think caravan hiring is. We think caravan hiring is hiring out a caravan that is mobile, because traditionally caravans are mobile and they're not so much static. So I think when it comes to insurance, I think all your listeners would definitely consult a broker, but then also make sure that the policy that is in play, that the insurer knows exactly what you are covering and what you are doing in terms of your business activities. Because we also have a lot of people that do have tiny homes that live on the river around, obviously we're in Penrith, so in the Nepean River, and then they've got activities such as, kayaking. They're advertising these type of activities, mind you, as well. So when you're advertising these types of activities, then essentially the client feels that those activities, they're going to that property for those activities. So if there's a claim relating to a water sport and there's an exclusion, or the insurance company does not know that you're not disclosing that there are water type activities that you're advertising, then there could be a big gap in cover as well. So I think when it comes to insurance, you definitely need to, I think, always consult a broker, because the broker's got the expertise to be dealing with it as well. And if not, if you speak to the insurer direct, you need to make sure that the whole story in regards to what you're doing is being picked up, and that you have detailed notes on those conversations that you have with the insurer, so that you can make an informed decision to make sure that you're covered for all the risks associated with that option. And to be honest, people that are getting tiny homes, a lot of people that are getting tiny homes are doing that to also have the option to rent it out as well. So it is a big movement of not just owner-occupier because of the change, the legislation in regards to not being able to live in them full time. But the hire option is definitely something that a lot of the clients do, and they do need to make sure that they are covered.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say, I guess the takeaways from that is, like, when you are looking for insurance and you're consulting with your insurance broker or directly with insurance company, is that you need to be super clear, like, is it a caravan? Is it a house that's on a foundation? Are you going to be using it for short-term rentals? Are you going to be offering any additional activities that then obviously that needs to be considered as well? So it's just super important to do that. And then obviously the whole council thing and all of that is another separate thing too. And it's navigating that, but it's really good to know. So it's like just being super clear with what you're doing and being honest, I guess, as well with what you're doing as well.
I think so, because at the end of the day, you have the risk and you have the exposure. So you're trying to mitigate that risk through an insurance policy, and that the strength of that insurance policy is only going to be based on the information you provide that insurer at the time.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm wondering, is there a difference in insurance? So for a caravan, when it comes to, say, a DIY tiny house build versus having a registered professional tiny building company build it for you?
Well, the strength of a manufacturer is that they often are listed as manufacturers with the insurers. So when you go, what's the year? It's a 2022 model, and what's the make? As soon as you hit one of those makes that the insurer knows, so Eco Designer Tony Homes, obviously they're a manufacturer. They'll be listed with insurers straight away. So essentially, when the insurer sees that and they pick up that, they look on their list and they go, yeah, perfect. We've got them on the list, and it's very easy to proceed. However, if you're doing your own caravan or part doing your own caravan, and it's a custom, you've just got to let the insurer know that it is a custom. They'll ask anyway, and then generally what they will do is they'll ask for photos. So they'll ask for photos, internal photos and external photos, and they'll also maybe want a disclosure question relating to that you use a registered builder or carpenter and that it's been manufactured as per the ADR rules as well. So obviously the VIN number, they'll ask for that immediately anyway. And obviously regos are not normally given because it's normally you normally get the insurance before it's actually road registered and on the road. So yes, that's fine, but they might ask additional questions when they insure it.
Okay, great. And before as well, you mentioned you're talking about Airbnb and short-term rentals, and Airbnb does have their own insurance. I'm wondering, from your experience or just research, are there any considerations to be mindful of? Like, if someone is wanting to rent out their tiny home through Airbnb, could that potentially be enough to consider just, okay, well, Airbnb's got insurance, or should I look into my own insurance above and beyond that too? Or is it just depending on the context and the situation, maybe other criteria of what people are looking for?
Yeah, I think both. And coming back to my own personal experience, like if we decide that we're going to rent our tiny home to people, what I would do is I would keep it on my farm pack at the moment. It's the cheapest option for my caravan as well, and it also allows me the flexibility of putting all the other additional things on it as well. But when I'm hosting, if I'm hosting through Airbnb and I pick up their insurance, I'm covered for certain limits, which is enough for me, really. I think it's like $1 million US for public liability if anyone gets injured. So if someone gets on my tiny home and tries to get up my very steep stairs to the loft bedroom and falls over and injures themselves, I can claim on my Airbnb liability policy. If they maliciously damage the property or if I lose a little bit of rent, I can claim on the Airbnb policy as well. But then when the renter's not there and they've left and I have a storm claim or if I have a bushfire claim, then I claim it on my own internal policy. So I would say that you would, with the platforms, yes, they're a great option for the insurance because they know exactly the type of clients that you have because you're it's through that platform as well. So they understand the type of claims that come through as well. But I would also make sure that you speak to your broker about that and say, look, I'm on a farm pack here, but now I'm on an Airbnb. Can you give me some advice regarding whether I've got any gaps in cover and if that's adequate? So I would definitely do both. And even like share cover, I think, is also in the marketplace, and that's backed by the CGU and RMA group. They offer insurance per visit, I think it is. These platforms are online, so they're not something that a broker would typically go and write for a client. But I know that's a local insurer. That is, they also do ride share as well. You can ride share in your car and so on. I would look for a combination of both, the combination of when you rent it and the combination of when it's not being rented out. In regards to landlord, when we talked about tiny houses that are DA approved, well, you could put it straight on a landlord policy on the short-term stays and it'll pick up everything. It'll pick up the loss of rent, it'll pick up rent default, malicious damage by a tenant, it'll pick up your public liability, it'll pick up material damage if it burns down, it'll pick up the contents. So essentially a tiny house without, a tiny house which is DA approved, and even if it's short-term stays by Airbnb, I would just stick it straight on the landlord policy. It's the safest and it's broadest cover.
And what about, because some people will also maybe not use Airbnb, but still use a tiny house as like a business on the side independently and in their own business name. So, and what are some of the issues or limitations with insurance when it comes to that?
If it's a tiny house on foundations with a DA-approved building, you can still run it on a landlord policy. You just won't pick up some types of cover depending on the insurer. And there'll be some limitations. So rent default would be able to be used because it's not registered, not managed for it. Sometimes loss of rent might not be also covered as well. But I think, look, there's going to be different options there. But really with that, when it comes into not renting through certain platforms, you need to really check with the insurer what's covered and what's not covered. I know some policies, some of the direct insurance policies, they start to add platforms to their wording. So they'll like add, I can't remember exactly, like, camp life or camp 2 or outdoorsy, but they might not have added, Airbnb or so. And it will evolve as different platforms spring to life in regards to this peer-to-peer sharing and so on concept that's gone through the whole community really. And has infiltrated many businesses. But at the time that you put a policy in place, you just got to make sure that that your platform's being picked up, and if it's not on a platform, that the policy will still respond, and that's on a case-by-case basis, unfortunately.
Yeah. It sounds like it's, and everyone has different uses and contexts and situations. Yeah. So I'm wondering though, because there is such, I guess, not a super clear, like this is specifically for tiny homes and these are the specialized options. From your perspective and just like what you're seeing out there now, talking to clients and all of that, what do you feel needs to happen or to be put into place in order for tiny homes to have more specific options or specialized options for insurance cover?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it's the growth of the industry which is going to fuel it. So the insurance is always behind market forces. I mean, they start sustaining losses in certain areas, or things can't be insured because of the growth of an industry, and then the insurers start to respond to that as well by either putting a new product in or putting a scheme together. Like an insurance broker might go to an insurer and say, we want to put a scheme together for specialised tiny houses that are rented through various platforms and also on their own platforms. And we want to pick up material damage, but we also want to pick up the rental aspects, and we also want to pick up the public liability, and we're seriously concerned about being sued by the person that hires it if they get injured on site. So when the market starts to increase, which it is doing, once the demand starts hitting insurers, which it is, I think down the track you'll see insurers adjusting their policies or coming out with specific policies that might be tailored to the tiny home Airbnb type concept as well. So and then when that happens, that'll pick up the claims. The claims will start coming through, and the insurance company will be able to rate it accordingly based on the claims, the loss ratio for that type of insurance line. And then you might see where one insurer responds, others do as well. So then once you start to get some competition within the marketplace, then we can start to see some relief in regards to premiums and so on, or some competition. At the moment, the caravan insurance policies, you can get varying. You can get the basic mobile caravan that you tow behind your car as well, which is super cheap, and then you can get the tiny house that's got the higher option on there, which is static, which could be super expensive. So there's a lot of variation within the marketplace, and that's because there's not a lot of competition within that as well. So I think down the track, as the growth of the tiny movement happens, I think we'll start to see more specialised insurers come in or schemes come in, and then with that competition, I think we'll see a better policy wording and better growth in that area.
Would you also say as the regulations around tiny homes change as well, and maybe that will also be a reflection of what might happen with insurance too?
Absolutely. I just think the regulations, the more you look into it, the regulations in regards to a tiny house or a caravan, say tiny house, but say a tiny house caravan on a property with no DA approved building, it's very restricted in regards to what your uses can be. So I would hope to see that the legislation relating to tiny home caravans be amended, because we need this sustainable alternative living arrangements, and having bigger type houses won't be the option, and our kids will not be able to afford the mortgages that are required to buy these houses. So the tiny option should be something that should be embraced, and that means that there needs to be more regulation to get it over the line, and so be it. It's definitely a restriction, because insurance companies, when they look at the caravans, the tiny home caravans, they're going to look at the legislation naturally and see what can be done and what can't be done in regards to legislation. And then that's going to make it a bit difficult to try to get an insurance policy over the line.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I totally agree with what you say. Like, this is an alternative housing option that is something that I feel can really bring hope to a lot of people, because of the skyrocketing in mortgages, the cost of land, and all of that stuff. The affordability of housing for people. potentially could own your own home for say 100, 150,000, maybe less if you're doing it yourself, and then not really having to be in that, that mortgage trap, and then, paying large amounts of rent, which are also increasing over time. So I know that the Australian Tiny House Association, they seem to be working alongside, I don't know if it's government departments or something, and councils to get tiny houses more recognised and to have more clarity around specific regulations for tiny houses, not just having them as caravans. So I'm excited to see where that goes in, I guess, the coming years, maybe.
Yeah, I am too. We get the back end as well. So we get our clients, because we've got quite a few that have got the tiny homes. We then get I've just received a letter from council. And council's come in and saw it, and they've said that it's on foundation, so it's a building and not a caravan, and it's been plumbed up to a septic system, so that reinforces this building and so on. And really, they've got to engage their lawyer. The lawyer's got to look at legislation and write back to them and say, no, they don't live in it more than 2 days in a row. They don't live in it more than 60 days in the calendar year. It's been put in the safe condition because it's on footings to prevent any damage in regards to wind. It's been set up to a septic system just like any other caravan park. And but there's a process. So this is from council in regards to saying that it's not approved, and the onus is on the owner to say no. Well, these things meet the legislation and regulation. So it's kind of tricky, and it needs to really be. And look, like you said, $100,000, like my caravan was, and we had all the options and all that stuff as well. And it's a beautiful build. It's it's got all the stuff inside: the kitchen, the bathroom, it's shower, it's got the air conditioner. It's great, and it's $100,000. And rebuild for some of these houses that we insure around this area is $1 million to build a 5-bedroom home with a double garage in the Blue Mountains area, with the restrictions on building in regards to bushfire zoned areas and so on. It could be $1 million to replace that. So for $100,000, you've got a cute little place that you can call your own.
Yeah, it's crazy. Hey, like when you put it like that, it's such a big jump in affordability. And are you finding that more clients are coming to you asking about tiny house insurance or caravan insurance?
Yes. Yeah. Definitely. Obviously, we try to do as much work for eco designer tiny homes and our numbers on there as well. So, but in saying that, we have a lot of people call and inquire as well that haven't seen our number on there as well. So it's definitely a growing movement. And I think at some stage, the councils and legislation will look to try to clean it up in regards to exactly what you can do and what you can't do to meet that demand. So I think it's exciting times for tiny home owners and so on. And part of the great experience of going and renting a tiny home on a property is that whole sustainability aspect. People, they could go and hire for the same price or close to the same price a big house out in the country as well, but it's sleeping in the loft bedrooms and opening the window up to the stars, and looking out onto a property. It's a whole experience of it that moves a lot of people, and I think hopefully with time everything will come together to support that industry.
Absolutely. I'm excited too. And I do agree. I think it is definitely growing. I mean, I think it started over the other side of the world, and Australia is it's expanding a lot more over here. And, seeing even different tiny house building companies, their waiting lists to have homes built for people are getting longer and longer. And it's really nice to see. And I think just being able to share this way of living and these options with more people is going to be so valuable, as I think a lot of people, especially over the last couple of years with everything that's happened, are just kind of reflecting on, well, what is it? How do I want to live, and what's most important, and what are my values, and how do I want to bring up my children, and all these different things that are these, I suppose, what really makes life beautiful and the essence of being human. And so I think tiny houses are a part of that. So yeah, I can't wait to see what happens there. And As we wrap up the conversation today, Paul, I'm wondering, is there anything else that you wanted to share with everyone listening? Anything that you feel like we may not have necessarily touched on enough around tiny house insurance, or even anything else at all around tiny houses?
It's just such a big industry in regards to the insurance aspects of things as well. So I think the main thing that I want to kind of really reiterate is that you should really always seek professional advice in regards to these type of insurances, because there are little things in the policy wordings that you may miss because you're not used to reading policy schedules and PDSs from day to day. So I would definitely say seek professional advice. And if you are dealing with an insurer direct that you've got a lot of your policies through and they're happy to write whatever risk you got, that to make sure that you've got a duty of disclosure, and under the retail products, the duty not to misrepresent. So you need to really make sure that it's quite clear in regards to what you're actually trying to insure. And that would be my main message. I think at the end of the day, touching back on what you just said before, no one really knows what it's like to live tiny until you do it. And once you do it, like you said, it does change your life, because you realise, do I need all these things? Do I need it so big? And we've been built up in a society where bigger is better and more is better as well. So I think, I'm excited and I'm happy to be with you guys, and I'm happy to help anybody. If they can call us anytime, and we'll give them the best advice we can at the time. And I think it's an industry that's going to evolve. I think it is evolving, and we're happy to help wherever we can.
Yeah, beautiful. That was what I was going to ask you next. So if anyone does want further help with their insurance for a tiny home, for a caravan, or even other types of insurance, and wants to work with you, is the best way to call the office, or what's the best way to get in contact?
Yeah. Call our office. It's 0247 315 335, or email me, Paul at insure.com.au. And we're happy to get back to people as soon as we can in regards to that as well. So it's funny when we get the caravan insurance, staff always hear me as soon as it's the caravan policy. I'm talking for over an hour about what they've done and how they've done it, what their options are, and just trying to learn all the little bits and pieces. So it's definitely a community. So I'm happy to help. Absolutely.
Yeah. I love it. And I mean, it makes it also really nice that you've got your own tiny home, so you can relate to people that are in this space a lot more, from having your own home, and also going through that process yourself and having to do the research, and then also speaking to lots of different people in this world too. So that's really great. I think that, like what you're doing is really helpful. And, if anyone wants to get in contact with you, I'll put all those details in the show notes for the episode. Also, the website is it's Ian Hewitt and Associates, isn't it? So
it's just ianhewitt.com.au.
ianhewitt.com.au. Okay, I'll put all of that in the show notes as well. So if anyone wants to check those out, they'll be at tinyhouseconversations.com. And, Paul, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing, all of these things about tiny house insurance. I know it's one of those topics that there's a bit of uncertainty about. And I know that just from speaking to different people and being in tiny house groups and all of that it's always a question that comes up, and hasn't been a definitive answer. So I think there's a lot of great insights in here. So thank you so much for all that.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. And, if you're listening to this episode at home, thanks for taking the time to hang out with us today. If you want more Tiny House Conversations, I release new episodes every Thursday. So if you hit the subscribe button, you'll know exactly when the latest episode comes out. And until the next episode, I'll see you then. Hey, Tiny Houses, thanks again for listening. And if you enjoyed the conversation today, you found it valuable, and you want to support the podcast, the best way you can do that is to share the love. That way I can keep bringing you more Tiny House Conversations to help you on your own tiny journey. So here are 3 ways that you can support the podcast. Number 1, if you have a friend or family member that you feel would benefit from hearing these conversations, feel free to share it with them, email them, text them, send them a telegram, do whatever you need to do to share it with them. Number 2, if you hit the subscribe button, you'll know exactly when the next episode is live. And number 3, if you head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to podcasts and leave a 5-star rating and review. Thank you so much in advance. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next episode.